What happens when a woman's version of openness becomes the line that ends her marriage? Can emotional manipulation disguise itself as honesty until the law draws the final boundary? When a husband stops pleading and starts documenting, love turns into evidence. I'm Liora Vale, and I honestly thought I was being brave when I told my husband I wanted to open our marriage. I didn't mean chaos. I meant honesty, growth, evolution. Owen always said I was restless, but I called it curiosity. To me, love wasn't about ownership, it was about experience. So when I mentioned the idea of sharing our bed with my ex, Ethan, I expected Owen to at least listen. I thought he'd see it as proof that I trusted him enough to be transparent. He didn't shout. He just stared at me, silent in that way that made my skin crawl. He asked if I was serious. I said it was only a thought experiment. But the truth was, I'd already spoken to Ethan. I just wanted to see if Owen would react the way I predicted, small, possessive, outdated. I told myself it was a test of love, not a betrayal. I even joked about it to my sister, who said I was playing with fire. I laughed and said, "Fire keeps things interesting." Now I realized that the silence Owen gave me that night wasn't confusion or fear. It was the sound of someone already deciding to leave. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The night I brought it up, we were sitting at the kitchen table. Owen was finishing his second glass of wine, reading something on his phone. I waited until he looked relaxed, then said I'd been thinking about ways to strengthen our marriage. He smiled faintly and asked what I meant. I told him that most couples failed because they refused to evolve, that monogamy wasn't natural, and that maybe we could be different. He frowned, not angry, just confused. He asked if I was unhappy. I said no, I was just curious. When I mentioned Ethan's name, the air shifted. Owen set his glass down slowly. He asked if I was joking. I said it was just a thought, that I didn't mean anything literal. But I kept talking, explaining that I'd spoken to Ethan recently, and he'd apologized for everything between us. I said it made me realize closure could be healing, maybe even shared. Owen's face didn't move, but I could see his jaw tighten. He said, "You already talked to him?" I said, "Yes, but it's fine. We're adults." He got up and started washing his glass, even though it was already clean. I followed him, saying he was misunderstanding me, that I wasn't saying I wanted Ethan back, just that I wanted to erase the shame between us. He said, "You don't erase shame by repeating what caused it." I told him he was being dramatic. He asked if I'd been seeing Ethan behind his back. I laughed and said, "Of course not. I'm telling you everything now." But I hadn't told him everything. I didn't tell him Ethan had texted me late that week, saying he missed the spark we had. I didn't tell him I'd replied, "Some things never go away." I thought if I framed the idea as open-mindedness, I could justify the connection. Owen dried his hands and said, "You think this is honesty? It's cruelty." I rolled my eyes and told him not to twist my words. He said I didn't see people, only outcomes. I told him that was unfair. He walked out of the kitchen without looking back. When I went upstairs, he was already in bed, turned away from me. I climbed in beside him and said I just wanted to talk, but he didn't answer. I kept explaining anyway, how I wanted our marriage to be stronger, how hiding desire only built resentment. Finally, he said, "You want permission, not strength." I told him that was an ugly thing to say. He said, "Then maybe stop saying ugly things to defend yourself." He turned off the lamp and left me staring into the dark. I whispered that I loved him, hoping he'd respond. He didn't. The next morning, he made breakfast for Liam and barely spoke to me. When Liam asked if Mommy was sad, Owen said, "She just has a lot on her mind." I smiled too wide and said I was fine. After Owen left for work, I stood at the sink, staring at the dishes he'd washed the night before. My phone buzzed. It was Ethan again. So, did you tell him? I stared at the screen, my heart racing. I typed, yes. He didn't take it well, then deleted it before sending. By evening, Owen still hadn't called. I sent him a text, asking if he'd be home for dinner. He replied, "Don't wait for me." The words were simple, but they felt final. Later that night, I scrolled through my messages with Ethan again. I told myself it was harmless. Just conversation, just memories. I read one line he'd sent weeks ago. If he really loved you, he'd understand who you are. I didn't realize then how dangerous that sentence was. The house was silent. Liam was asleep. I thought about Owen's expression at the table. The stillness that looked like patience but wasn't. I should have known that silence meant he was already planning his way out. The fridge hummed, and my phone buzzed once more. A text from Ethan. "Still thinking about you tonight." I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. Down the hall, I heard the guest room door close softly. That sound settled in my chest like a warning I refused to hear. The next week, Owen moved through the house like a stranger renting a room. He spoke to Liam gently, but never to me unless it was about logistics, groceries, school pickup, bills. I told myself he was just cooling off. He'd always been slow to process emotion. I started acting extra sweet, cooking his favorite dinners, dressing up before he got home. He thanked me politely, but didn't sit down to eat. When I asked if he wanted wine, he said he was cutting back. When I touched his arm, he stepped aside as if I were just passing through. At work, I vented to Sophie. I told her Owen was being childish, that he'd rather punish me with silence than have a real adult conversation. She said, "You told him you wanted to sleep with your ex, Liora. That's not a debate topic." I laughed it off, said she was taking it too literally. "It's about transparency," I told her. "Modern relationships survive on honesty." She gave me a look that said she didn't agree but didn't want to argue. That night, Ethan called. I shouldn't have answered, but curiosity pulled me in. He said he'd been thinking about me, that what I told Owen proved I was brave. I told him bravery wasn't the word Owen would use. Ethan laughed, said men like him never change, that they hide behind control. I told him not to talk about Owen that way, but I didn't hang up either. Later, after Liam went to bed, Owen came home. He looked tired but calm. I asked if we could talk. He said, "I'm not sure you know what that word means." I followed him into the kitchen, insisting that we needed to face this as partners. He said, "You stopped being my partner when you started testing me." I told him he was twisting things again, that I had just wanted us to grow beyond jealousy. He said, "Jealousy keeps boundaries in place. You erased them." I told him boundaries were prisons. He said, "Then you built one for yourself." I started crying, asking if he didn't love me anymore. He said he did, but that love wasn't the problem. Respect was. I told him respect went both ways, that he should respect my feelings. He said, "I do. That's why I'm not shouting." That line stung worse than anger. He walked past me, grabbed his jacket, and left. I stood in the doorway watching his car pull out of the driveway, headlights flashing across the living room wall. The next morning, a group chat notification popped up. Naomi had tagged me in a meme about modern marriage. It showed a woman holding two men's hands. The comments under it were full of laughing emojis. Sophie texted me privately, "You might want to check your privacy settings." When I looked closer, I saw that someone had screenshotted an old post of mine about ethical openness and shared it around. People were gossiping. At lunch, Naomi called, saying she didn't mean to stir things up. I said it was fine, but my voice shook. She said Owen had called Mom, asking her to take Liam for the weekend. My stomach dropped. I asked why. She said, "He didn't say, but maybe you should think about what that means." That night, when Owen returned, he was quiet again. I told him I'd seen the posts and that people were twisting the story. He said, "You started the story." I told him he was supposed to defend me. He said, "You made sure I couldn't." I followed him down the hallway, saying we could fix this if he'd just let go of the anger. He stopped at the guest room door and said, "You've mistaken forgiveness for permission too many times." Then he shut the door behind him. I stood there, shaking. My phone buzzed again, Ethan's name. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then, somewhere inside that dark house, I heard the unmistakable sound of a drawer closing. Slow, deliberate, like a man putting something away for good. 2 days later, I convinced myself things could still be repaired if I showed Owen I wasn't ashamed. Pretending confidence was easier than feeling guilt. So I posted a photo of us from last year's vacation, the one where we were smiling on the beach, sunburned and happy. My caption read, "Marriage isn't about rules, it's about evolution." I thought it sounded poetic, maybe even wise. Within an hour, it had 30 likes and 2 comments asking if Owen had seen it. When he came home that evening, he saw the post open on my phone. He didn't say anything. He just looked at it for a few seconds, then walked past me to the laundry room. I followed him, saying I was tired of pretending to be perfect, that we should be proud to live honestly. He said, "You mean proud to embarrass me?" I told him embarrassment came from shame, and shame was old thinking. He said, "No, shame is conscience." His words hit like a slap I couldn't feel right away. I tried to joke, saying he sounded like a therapist. He just nodded, as if agreeing with himself, not me. That scared me more than if he'd shouted. On Friday night, Naomi invited us to her housewarming party. I didn't want to go, but Owen said he'd drive. He looked exhausted but strangely peaceful. At the party, people stared. I pretended not to notice. Naomi introduced Owen to her friends as the loyal husband. It was meant to be a tease, but it landed like a bruise. Someone asked him how he felt about my open philosophy. He said quietly, "I've learned silence can be the safest answer." The crowd laughed, thinking it was a joke. I laughed too, louder than anyone. Then I saw a phone camera pointed at us, recording. Someone shouted for a toast. Naomi handed me a drink, saying, "To modern love." Everyone cheered. I raised my glass because I didn't know what else to do. Later, Owen disappeared outside. I found him on the porch, staring at the streetlights. I asked why he was hiding. He said, "I'm not hiding. I'm waiting for you to stop performing." I told him I wasn't performing. I was surviving. He said, "You've confused survival with attention." I told him he was humiliating me in front of people. He said, "You did that already." I felt my face burn. I wanted to slap him, but I smiled instead and said, maybe I should just go inside and talk to people who understood me. He said, "You mean people who agree with you." Then he walked away. Inside, Naomi's friend showed me the video already uploaded to social media. The caption read, "When your marriage is more complicated than your cocktail order." I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. I looked around the room and realized everyone was pretending not to look at me. I found Naomi and told her to take it down. She said, "It's already everywhere." Owen didn't come back inside. I drove home alone. When I got there, the living room light was on and his suitcase was by the couch. My chest went tight. He came out of the guest room, phone in hand, eyes calm. I asked if he was leaving. He said, "Not yet." I told him I'd made a mistake. He said, "Yes, you keep making the same one." I tried to grab his hand, but he stepped back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt louder. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the clock, the rustle of papers somewhere behind a closed door. Then I heard it again, the soft click of his laptop shutting. I got up and peeked down the hall. The light from the guest room spilled across the floor, and I saw Owen's silhouette at his desk, motionless. On the table beside him was a neat stack of folders, each labeled in his small, careful handwriting. One read, "Household," another read, "Liam." He closed them one by one, then turned off the light. The last sound was the latch of the door settling into place. By Sunday, the video from Naomi's party had spread beyond our circle. A coworker messaged me, "Are you okay?" That meant she'd seen it too. The clip showed me raising my glass and laughing, while Owen stood beside me, expressionless. The comments were worse than the video, strangers debating whether I was brave or cruel. I tried to delete my account, but screenshots were already circulating. When I confronted Naomi, she said she didn't mean for it to spread. I told her she'd ruined my life. She said quietly, "You did that yourself." I hung up on her and sat on the edge of my bed, shaking. I called Owen, but he didn't pick up. Instead, he texted, "Liam's staying with my mum tonight." I told myself that was good, that Liam didn't need to see me upset. Still, the silence in the house felt sharp. I poured wine, scrolled through Ethan's old messages, and tried to convince myself none of this was really my fault. I was misunderstood, ahead of my time. Owen just couldn't handle change. That's what I told myself until the knock came at the door. It was Celia, his mother. She didn't wait to be invited in. She stood in the doorway, eyes full of disappointment instead of anger. She asked, "What are you doing to my son?" I told her not to believe everything she saw online. She said she didn't need to. She'd seen the pain on Owen's face. I told her Owen was just sensitive. She said, "No, you're cruel and calling it honesty." I told her she had no right to judge me, that she was old-fashioned. She said, "Old-fashioned people keep their families together." I laughed bitterly and told her maybe Owen needed to grow up. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "He already has. That's why he's leaving you properly." The word properly stuck in my mind after she left. I poured another drink and told myself she was bluffing. Owen wouldn't leave. He wasn't the type. The next morning, Naomi came by uninvited, bringing pastries as if sugar could fix anything. She sat on the couch and said, "You need to do damage control." I told her I was done explaining myself. She said, "Liora, people think you're cruel." I said, "People love a villain." She stared at me like I'd said something disgusting. Then she asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Have you talked to Ethan since all this started?" I hesitated. She sighed. "You have, haven't you?" I said it didn't matter, that Ethan understood me in ways Owen never could. She shook her head and said, "That's not understanding. That's convenience." When she left, I felt something tighten inside me, like a door closing. I looked around the living room and saw all the spaces where Owen's things used to be. His books, his slippers, even the picture of us from our honeymoon. Gone. That night, I drove to Celia's house to see Liam. Owen wasn't there. He'd gone downtown, she said. The word hit me again. Downtown. I remembered hearing him say something similar on the phone a few days earlier. I asked if she knew what it meant. She said, "You'll find out soon." I kissed Liam goodnight, trying to smile while my stomach twisted. He looked up and asked, "Mum, are you and Dad still married?" I froze. I told him yes, of course we were. He asked, "Then why do you live in different rooms?" I told him not to worry, that grown-ups just needed space sometimes. He nodded like he wanted to believe me. When I left Celia's house, the night air felt heavy. My phone buzzed in my bag. An unknown number. I ignored it. But as I drove home, the phone vibrated again and again until I finally glanced at the screen. The preview said, "Downtown 10:15 confirmed." I didn't know what it meant, but the calmness of those words scared me more than anything Owen had ever said. I barely slept after that message. Every sound made me flinch. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the hallway clock. By morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe Owen had a meeting. Maybe Downtown 10:15 was about work. But the more I tried to believe that, the more the words replayed in my head. When he came home that afternoon, I asked him where he'd been. He said, "Out." I pushed for details. He said, "You already know enough." I laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood. He didn't smile. his calmness had grown into something heavier, quieter, like he'd already said everything he needed to in another room where I wasn't invited. I told him we needed to fix our marriage, to talk before it was too late. He said, "It's already too late for talking." I told him that was cruel. He said, "No. What's cruel is pretending destruction is progress." His voice wasn't angry. It was final. I started pacing, saying that everyone was against me, that his mother, my sister, even my friends were feeding him lies. He said, "They didn't have to. You gave them proof yourself." I said, "People twist things online." He nodded slowly. "That's why I'm keeping my own version of events." I asked what that meant. He said, "Documentation." He moved to the living room and picked up a stack of folders from the table. Each one had a label: household, Liam, finances. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Organizing reality." I told him he was acting like a lawyer. He said, "Someone has to." I tried to laugh it off, to tease him, to break that stillness that scared me. "So what? You're building a case now," I said, pretending it was a joke. He looked at me, completely calm. "I'm building a future without confusion." That sentence landed hard. I felt a rush of heat rise in my chest. I told him he was being ridiculous, that no court would take him seriously. He said, "You think this is about punishment? It's not. It's about protection." I told him I loved him, that I'd gone too far, but I could fix it. He said, "You always say that after you break something." I told him he was overreacting. He said, "Maybe, but I'm done reacting." For the first time, I realized he wasn't bluffing. His voice didn't sound like someone trying to hurt me. It sounded like someone who'd already let go. I followed him into the kitchen and said we could start over, that we could take a trip, go to counseling, delete everything online. He said, "I don't need counseling to know when trust is gone." I said, "You're still wearing your ring." He looked down at it, then slowly took it off. "Not anymore." My throat tightened. I reached for him, but he stepped back. I said, "What about Liam?" He said, "That's exactly who I'm thinking about." Then he put the ring on the counter, next to the folder labeled Liam. The sound of metal on granite was sharper than I expected. I told him this wasn't fair, that he was making me out to be a monster. He said, "You did that when you invited one into our home." I shouted that he was twisting my words. He said quietly, "No, I'm just listening to them." He turned and walked toward the stairs. I called after him, asking what he was planning. He stopped halfway up and said, "I'll handle it properly." The words hung in the air like smoke. I didn't understand them fully, but I knew what they meant. Something was ending, and it wasn't just the marriage. That night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty space where his ring had been. The house was too quiet again. Then I heard the front door close, soft, certain, like a man who'd made peace with his decision. The next morning was bright, too bright, the kind of clear, perfect sky that makes bad news feel crueler. I got dressed carefully, putting on makeup, pretending it was a normal day. I told myself Owen would come home, that he just needed space, that he was probably at his mother's. But a part of me knew better. The silence in our house didn't feel temporary anymore. It felt like something that had already been decided. Around 10, there was a knock on the door. I thought maybe it was him. I hurried over, heart pounding. But when I opened it, a man in a dark jacket stood there holding a large envelope. Behind him, parked neatly by the curb, was Owen's car. I froze. The man asked, "Mrs. Vale?" I nodded. He handed me the envelope and said, "You've been served." I just stood there, unable to speak. My hand shook as I took it. The man turned and walked back to his car, where Owen was waiting in the driver's seat. He didn't come out. He didn't even look angry, just distant, focused. I called his name, but he didn't react. I tore open the envelope, and my eyes caught the first line. Petition for dissolution of marriage and temporary custody orders. I felt dizzy, the words blurred. It wasn't just a threat, it was done. I stumbled down the steps, calling out to him. "Owen, please, we can fix this." He rolled down his window. His face was calm, unreadable. "There's nothing to fix," he said. "You already built a different life." I told him I didn't mean for any of this to happen. He said, "You meant every part you enjoyed." Neighbors were outside, an older couple across the street, watching quietly, pretending to water their plants. My cheeks burned. I begged him not to do this here, not in public. He said, "Public is where you wanted to live." I held up the papers, shaking, asking if this was revenge. He said, "No, it's protection." His voice didn't rise. He didn't gloat. He just put the car in gear and looked straight ahead. Before driving off, he added softly, "Tell Liam the truth when he's old enough. Tell him you wanted honesty." Then he was gone. I stood in the driveway barefoot, still holding the papers. The wind flipped one of the pages open, and I saw my name typed beside his, separated by neat printed lines. Petitioner, Owen Vale. Respondent, Liora Vale. The language was cold, factual, everything I had spent years pretending love wasn't. Naomi pulled up minutes later, probably warned by Celia. She ran toward me, asking what happened. I couldn't answer. She saw the envelope and covered her mouth. "Oh, Liora," she whispered. "He actually did it." I said he wouldn't go through with it, that this was just a mistake. She shook her head slowly. "He's not like you. When he says he's done, he means it." I sank down onto the steps, still clutching the papers. Naomi knelt beside me, but I pushed her hand away. I didn't want comfort. I wanted control again. I wanted to rewind to when I thought open meant free instead of empty. Across the street, the neighbor's dog barked, breaking the silence. I could still smell Owen's cologne in the air, faint but steady. I looked at the envelope one last time. There it was, in plain print. Custody hearing scheduled. Downtown, 10:15 a.m. The same phrase I'd seen in his texts. The one I'd ignored. The paper fluttered in my hands as the breeze picked up. I wanted to scream, but the only sound that came out was a broken laugh. Because somehow, even after all this, part of me still believed I was the victim. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.